In the early 1970s, an aspiring writer living in a trailer tapped out 3 single-spaced pages of a story, based on a memory of a summer job he had when he was a teenager, as a janitor at Brunswick High School, cleaning rust stains in the girls' locker room. The 3 pages detailed a young girl getting made fun of when she suddenly gets her period and doesn't know what it is, with the other girls pelting her with sanitary napkins and tampons, and she fights back with telekinesis. The writer, who had intended for the story to be a novella sold to a magazine, realizes that to work among its other problems, like the fact that he didn't know how to write teenage girls, the story would have to be much longer than a magazine would allow. And since he couldn't spend weeks writing a novella he couldn't sell, he crumpled up the pages and tossed them in the trash. His wife dug the pages out of the trash and read them, and encouraged him to continue the story. And he did. Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Stephen King is one of the most prolific horror writers, hell, one of the most prolific writers to ever exist, period. The Maine-born writer has, at the time of this video's writing, published 56 novels and over 200 short stories. And it all started with Carrie. Well, to be fair, he had written a lot of short stories that had been published previously, but Carrie was his first published novel. Now, I could have taken the easy way out with this. As you no doubt know, the newest film adaptation of Stephen King's 1986 novel, It, was recently released, and I could have done a video to tie into that, which might have bolstered the view count somewhat. But I didn't do it for 2 reasons. 1, I like to start at the beginning. And 2, because everyone else is going It crazy right now, and I want to be different. Who knows, I might do something to tie into it when the sequel comes out in 2019. But the book at hand today, Carrie, is yet another book that frequently finds itself on banned book lists because... I mean, yeah, this book is obscene, but that's sort of the point. The book details bullying, sexual repression, and a whole lot of murder. Anyway, let's get straight into the book and see how Stephen King's first novel jump-started a career that gave us evil dogs, evil cars, and evil clowns. This is Carrie. The cover is, well, actually most releases of the book have very similar covers, but I'm going to focus on the cover for the edition that I own, because a good chunk of the later ones are movie poster covers, which I despise, unless the movie has a really cool poster. Anyway, the cover is red. Like, super duper red. Like, the USSR wasn't ever this red. It's like, how much more red could this cover be? And the answer is none. None more red. We've got Carrie, half of her face anyway, on the right side, while we've got Stephen King's name at the top in really big letters, along with the cover telling us that he's a #1 New York Times best-selling author. I never get why those are on all of his books. I mean, I think at this point everyone knows that. At the bottom we have the very tiny title, along with it telling us that this edition has a new introduction from King himself. The intro basically amounts to King giving his personal history of the creation of Carrie, along with sharing real-world people he knew that inspired some of the characters. The cover is really good, though like many of the other prolific authors we've looked at before, you're reading this on the merit of the author's name and not the cover. Let's get to the story. The story centers around Carrie White as she develops latent telekinetic powers as a result of her getting her period rather late in high school, after first period gym. Which I now realize has 2 meanings. Huh. The other girls are like high school girls are, not very forgiving about that and make fun of her. During the incident, the gym teacher, Miss Desjardins, walks in and at first yells at Carrie for getting blood everywhere, before realizing that Carrie doesn't understand what's happening and she comforts her. See, Carrie's mother is a religious zealot, and so she never told Carrie about sex ed, and I guess the schools didn't teach it properly. Or Carrie was absent that day. We're also told that Carrie's mother was repressed as well, considering that she gave birth to Carrie in her bedroom, having called her pregnancy cancer of the womanly parts. And don't get it wrong, she's not just regular, run-of-the-mill, obsessively religious. We learn later on that Carrie's mother and father were Baptists at some point, but left the church because they believed that the Baptists were doing the work of the Antichrist. So even regular religious nutjobs would think that she's a little too much for them. Carrie's telekinesis causes a light bulb to explode, though no one realizes that's what it is, as Miss Desjardins decides that the girls who taunted Carrie should be punished for their actions. Carrie is sent home, where her mother berates her for getting her period and locks her in their prayer closet, telling her that her period is punishment for some sin she committed. So menstruation is John Doe from Seven? Anyway, Miss Desjardins decides, partly due to their actions and partly due to her own shame at having berated Carrie before she figured out Carrie's problem, that the punishment for the girls should be suspension and banishment from the upcoming prom. However, the principal manages to talk her down to a week's detention, but if they skip out on that, they get her original punishment. Only one of the girls who made fun of Carrie, Sue Snell, another popular girl, feels remorse for her actions, only having joined in due to mob mentality and struggles to find a way to make amends with Carrie. She decides, even though that she could have attended, she's not going to attend the prom, and has her boyfriend Tommy, equally popular, ask Carrie to the prom in her place. Meanwhile, Chris Hargensen, the ringleader of the girls, think Regina George from Mean Girls or Ashley A from Recess, manages to piss off Miss Desjardins again, and after trying and failing to rally all the other girls to walk out of the detention, she is alone banned from the prom and suspended. Chris is not happy about that, and has her father, a local lawyer, attempt to intimidate the principal into lessening the severity of the punishment to allow her to attend prom. But the principal knows what he's doing and threatens a countersuit on behalf of Carrie, and so Mr. Hargensen gets nothing changed. Chris naturally then decides to go out for revenge against Carrie, teaming up with her sort of abusive boyfriend, Billy Nolan, a delinquent, to do so. Carrie accepts the prom date with Tommy. She even sews her own prom dress, but her mother is vehemently against it, yelling and berating her. But Carrie's powers have manifested enough that she can hold her own against her mother and tells her, in no uncertain terms, that she is attending that prom with Tommy. Even if you've never seen or read Carrie, you know what happens here. Prom starts out well as Carrie starts to come out of her shell, and during a tiebreaker vote, her and Tommy are appointed prom king and queen. At the crowning of the king and queen, Chris and her boyfriend Billy dump pig's blood on Carrie as revenge, and accidentally drop the bucket onto Tommy's head, killing him. The resulting uproar of laughter in the gym is enough to push Carrie overboard, and she storms out of the gym before going into full telekinesis mode. She rushes out of the school, and while initially only planning on locking everyone inside with the sprinklers running, she goes overboard and causes a fire that engulfs the school, killing virtually everyone inside. Though Chris and Billy escape since they didn't stick around to watch the aftermath. Sue, who had decided to take a trip down to the school because she knew something was wrong, witnesses the school exploding. Carrie heads home, leaving destruction in her wake. Gas stations blow up, and she basically destroys the entire small town of Chamberlain, Maine. She makes it home, where her mother was waiting with a knife, to do what she says she should have done when she was pregnant with Carrie. Carrie kills her mother by stopping her heart, but not before she gets a good stab off. Chris and Billy, who were staying in the motel, find out about the destruction and start driving away, but Carrie makes their car crash. Sue finds Carrie in the parking lot of the motel and comforts her as she dies, with the novel closing out with a letter mentioning a little girl in the Appalachians with latent telekinetic powers, implying that Carrie might have been reborn into a loving family. Salutations. Stephen King releases at least one new full-length novel per year, sometimes two, and on rare occasions even three. Like most readers, you may find yourself wondering, How does he do it? Well, stay tuned after the break, and I'll let you in on his secret. And we're back, and you're not the only person who asked that question. Even other writers are amazed at his talent, including George R.R. Martin, the New Jersey-born writer responsible for the A Song of Fire and Ice series, which was adapted into the acclaimed HBO series Game of Thrones. During a talk in 2016, Martin asked King point blank, "How the fuck do you write so many books so fast?" To which King responded that he wakes up every morning with the intent to write 6 pages, and aside from life getting in the way, he always hits those 6 pages. And so a 360-page book is usually done in 2 months. Which is just really damn impressive. All the characters in this book are written so beautifully and realistically. We get a full record of Carrie's bullying from throughout school, and it's impressive. Not the bullying, but the fact that she hadn't snapped before and managed to get through it all those years. And Carrie is definitely a victim here, between her mother, the kids at school, the school officials that can't even get her name right. I don't like rampant death tolls, but King made sure that all of the death he wrote was justified from a story perspective. King makes it super clear that everyone at the school bullied her, so while you might wonder, did everyone who died deserve it? Maybe not, but Carrie did have a reason to do what she did, regardless of the morality. And the book really does make you feel for her. I have never experienced anything like she did. But damn it, I could feel her emotions. I could feel her shame and anger and sadness and happiness, because it's written in such a way that just evokes those emotions naturally. It's really impressive, and that is partly due to the fact that King based Carrie off of 2 girls from his hometown that he had known growing up. Not the telekinesis part, of course, but the crazy religious bullying stuff, yeah. And I think that makes it even more powerful, considering that, as you well know, all the bullying stuff that happens in this book could, and let's face it, probably has happened in real life. Sue is a rather sympathetic character. I like that she starts out side by side with Chris, but while Chris goes off the rails and eventually sets in motion the events that cause so much destruction and death, Sue feels remorse. It's brilliant too, because that's a very human way to go about it. It's not like she got lectured and she felt remorse. She just felt remorse after doing it. Sue is a beautifully written character, especially the bits from the White Commission testimony, where the prosecution is trying to use Sue as a scapegoat, since she's the only one alive who was part of Chris's friend group, and she goes off on the prosecutor. And the fact that Sue, the one who gave Carrie her one night to be accepted, is the one who comforts her as she dies, is powerful too. I feel bad for Tommy because he was one of the only straight-up good people in the book. He didn't have to take Carrie, and he certainly didn't have to be nice to her just because Sue wanted him to, but he was, which makes the fact that Chris and Billy kill him add to their already wicked characters. Tommy was a genuinely good person, and he was starting to fall for Carrie, and he ends up dead thanks to Chris and Billy. Chris and Billy are evil. There is no other way to say it. Billy is definitely a lot more twisted than Chris, but she is not without sin, regardless of how abusive Billy is. She still had the idea to do the prank. Billy just did all the legwork. Chris's entire plan, finding the blueprints for the gym, using the blood, that was all her, and it was all reprehensible. I can definitely say that I'm happy that they got their comeuppance in the end. It's even poetic with it being a car crash, considering Billy's love of driving fast. With Chris, it's obvious that her father was just as unscrupulous as she is, and maybe it's his fault that Chris turned out the way she did. In a way, Chris and Billy are both perfect for each other, because they're both twisted in their own ways. I think the worst thing is that Chris and people like her just exist. Sure, maybe not as twisted and sadistic, but the ringleader of groups that bully the weird kids? It's something that a lot of people can relate to. Take it from me, I was one of the weird kids. Maybe that's why I connect with this book so much. I wasn't bullied. I wasn't popular, but I was never really called names, and there was never anything physical, but I definitely knew people like Chris who made fun of the quiet kids who kept their heads down, the ones who acted a little different, so that made their actions hit a lot more close to home than is usual for a fiction novel. Margaret White, as I stated in the summary, is just a big ball of crazy. And it's not even like she was raised that way. Her mother was fairly normal, and Margaret was going nuts about her mother and stepdad living in sin. There's also a bit that suggests that before Carrie she had a miscarriage, which can't have been good for her fragile mental state. Not to mention how hypocritical she is, all angry about her mother living in sin, when she conceived Carrie before she married Mr. White. I don't even have much to say in analysis. She pretty much ruined Carrie's life on her misguided religious crusade, so it really only could have been Carrie to get revenge on her. And the minor characters, Miss Desjardins, Principal Grail, they're all written very well. I like how Grail and Desjardins do, in the end, stand up for Carrie. It's Miss Desjardins who helps her in the shower and wants to throw the entire library at the other girls for their actions, and Grail manages to stand his ground against Mr. Hargensen. Sure, they had their own selfish reasons for doing so, but the fact they did speaks volumes. Stephen King is a brilliant writer in all facets of the craft, but his characters in this book are perhaps the best written fictional characters I've ever seen. The story is presented mostly in the form of excerpts from news articles, books, and court proceedings. A fairly strange but also effective way to tell the story. It's not just the story about what happened, it's about the aftermath and the history. In a way, that makes it even more powerful than if it was just a straight account of what happened, because we know the aftermath. We know that these events were researched and cataloged. The world of the story went on. That's something that we don't really get in a lot of fiction, where the story doesn't just end where the pages run out. Plus, it allows for more than an omniscient narrator could give. It's like, think of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the narrator basically knows everything. This is exactly like that, except we're reading excerpts from The Shadow Exploded, or sworn testimony from the White Commission report. It's world building on a Tolkien-esque scale, but done in a very simple way. In fact, this book is basically all of the Douglas Adams writing conventions played completely straight and serious. And in a way, that's exactly what makes this novel so scary. We know everything involved, but most of it is written in such a clinical, academic way that it really feels like reading accounts of actual events. The plot, even though it takes breaks to give backstory, it never feels plotting. It's fast-paced through to the end, despite the fact that we keep stopping to get exposition on telekinesis and heredity and Carrie's family history and excerpts from Sue's tell-all book. I'm in a creative writing class this semester, and the professor has us do an exercise where we look at other students' work, where we think about what's lost or gained by the addition or removal of an aspect of the work. Sometimes it's as simple as punctuation or words, and sometimes ambiguousness. And I find myself doing that for this book, and I think that absolutely most of the punch for this book would have been lost if it was written like a straight novel with none of the excerpts in it. They give a certain clarity to the story, and I think that it would have been worse off without it. I commend King on managing to write a story that in the hands of a lesser author would have been boring and slow. This is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it as a good start for King's horror works. It's short, only clocking in officially at 199 pages for the original edition, and others may vary. Mine clocks in at 253, but still, it's short considering that it is over 1,000 pages, and 11/22/63 is nearly 900. And it's sweet. Not in the tone, naturally, but it's succinct in the way that it tells a story, and characteristic of King's style. I really don't like horror, as I'm sure that I've explained to excess on the show before, but I really enjoyed this book. I think it's the fact that it's not really focused on the supernatural elements. It's a character-driven story, with all of the horror elements coming from the characters themselves. It's specifically driven by Carrie, Chris, and Sue, and I think that makes the story very accessible, since the supernatural elements are explained simply and are easy to comprehend. We really get a well-rounded story. I can definitely see how this became the phenomenon it did. Definitely check this one out if you've never read it. If you want to get into Stephen King, this is definitely the place to start. Well, unless blood makes you squeamish. And that was Carrie. Was it good? Yeah, and you shouldn't be surprised by that. What you should be surprised about is that there was a stage musical adaptation of Carrie. And the recent off-Broadway production from 2012 is actually rather impressive. Truthfully, it's what inspired me to read the book. A song from it came up on shuffle when I was listening to Spotify like 6 times last year, so I buckled down and read it, and I really liked it. Just goes to show, there are benefits to not paying for Spotify Premium. Come to think of it, that's also why I started watching Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Regardless, I absolutely adore this book and can't sing its praises enough. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button, and if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comment section below. Oh, and if you want to be notified of new uploads, you can hit that bell icon. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. Happy Halloween, everyone, and remember, there's no better way to spend Halloween than ignoring trick-or-treaters and curling up with a good scary story while listening to grim grinning ghosts and spooky scary skeletons on loop for 24 hours. Wait, am I the only one who does that? Anyway, I'll see you next time for a review of the very first Star Trek Discovery novel. The other girls are, like high school girls are, not very forgiving about that and make fun of her. During the incident, the gym teacher, Miss Desjardins. Meanwhile, Chris Hargensen, the ringleader of the girls, think Regina George from Mean Girls or Ashley A. from Recess, manages to piss off actual events. The plot, even though it takes breaks to give backstory, it never feels plotting. It's fast. Why am I incapable of speaking?